Welcome back to Composition as Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is the channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. In today's episode of How to Voice Root Position Chords, we're going to continue off of last week's episode. We'll have an introduction in which I'll go over some of the critical use of root position chords for fugue and orchestration. Then I will show you how to get set up properly for root position chords, and then finally we'll end with some action. Why composers study harmony? So when it comes to fugue, one of the most important skills you're going to need is a flexibility when it comes to danger zones, so avoiding parallel fifths and octaves, for example. In this example, you'll see that we are in, global key is F major, but we're actually in D major. And notice that the 5 is the A, and we have a double leading tone with that C sharp. It's at the unison, and Bach has actually done it at least in one of his chorales. I had to do this, as I'm about to show you, in order to avoid parallel octaves. Also notice that C sharp is held over, which is a suspension. In this example here, you'll see if I had voiced this a little more traditionally, 4 parts, and I had that A at the unison with baritone and tenor, then there's nowhere for that A to go for the septive cadence because the baritone's already going to the F sharp. Therefore, I had to do something unconventional. Another application for harmony is orchestration. You got to be really sensitive to the doubling. So in this first example of an orchestral work I'm currently composing, notice that we have that D in the bass is doubled in the violins. And on a subsequent listen, I realized it's kind of a dull texture. I don't really like it. So in this updated version, notice that I removed it, and in order to do so, I had to use unisons and push up the violin ones in a higher register. How to get better at harmony? So I would say the bare minimum is a time commitment of 3 hours a week, but that's for someone super focused, and you go into flow state. You're not going to get distracted. You're not going to have your phone out. You just know exactly what you want to accomplish. But most likely, you're going to need about 6 to 9 hours a week if you do not want a teacher. If you want a teacher, then maybe you'll have to put more, maybe you'll have to put less. But if you want to do it on your own and you want to put a lot of integrity into it, you're going to have to devote about this much. Now, another aspect of this is the pursuit of excellence, okay? You got to follow the basic rules. This is not about individual expression. It will help with individual expression later on, but this is about conforming to tradition. Make sure that you follow the rules for the septive cadence and parallel fifths and parallel octaves. This is your complete and utter control, and if you would like your work submitted and reviewed, just make sure that you follow these basic rules. Also, check out my website to get more information about these rules. So in episode 1 from this season, we have a bastonnet or a bass exercise, and we have to first figure out the soprano. I will just very rapidly just review what we went over in the first episode. So we listened to the exercise at different speeds in order to hear the harmony. Then we had to make sure we copy down correctly. This is where a lot of composers and performers lose a lot of time because they rush through this. And then we started the Roman numerals. So just a quick review. So the exercise starts off in B minor, and then we quickly transition to D major. Notice the transition point. So first off at the end, we have 5 to 1, A to D. So we're clearly in D major, and the beginning is clearly in B minor. But the critical aspect for fugue especially is to know where is the transition point. So notice if we work backwards from the ending, we're in D major, so we have 1, 5, and prior, that's the 2, okay? And then we start from the beginning, go from 1, we go to the 5, we go to the 6. That's all in B minor. And then that 4 is the pivot chord. Next, we have the second phrase. All right, so it clearly ends in B minor. How do we know? We have that A sharp, okay, for the 5, so clearly we're going back into B minor, so we'll start backwards, so it's 1, it's 5, and then that E is going to be a 4 in B minor, and let's go from prior. So we start off in D major, second phrase, it's a 4, we go to 5, we go to 6, and then the 2. So you're noticing a pattern. So that 2 in the major or the 4 in the minor, between relative keys, is a pivot or transition chord. You're going to see this a lot, especially for sequences, especially for fugue. Now we have phrase 3. So this stays in B minor the whole time. We have a deceptive cadence. We have the 5. Don't forget the underline there. I explained that on the website. Okay, if you download the exercise, that means that one of the voices is moving, so the harmony is staying constant, but another voice is moving. As we can see, it's going to end with a plagal cadence because we don't have a 5-to-1, we have a 4-to-1. Just a couple other important details. So the plagal cadence is very special. We don't come across it all the time, but it is really, really important. I think it's especially important for fugue. It's especially important for chorales. So one of the things is you have to remember how to correctly voice it. All right, so you're not going to be able to do the leading tone to tonic as is most satisfactory for perfect authentic cadence. And if you remember from season 1, the very first exercise, we had a soprano exercise in G minor. So not a bass exercise, but a soprano exercise. Now, that soprano exercise ended with G, G, G. And after doing a lot of work, it was very difficult the first time around, we figured out that the best voicing for the bass was a plagal exercise, plagal cadence with a 6, 4, 1. The plagal cadence is specifically a 4-to-1, but many times it has a 6 prior. And so the most satisfactory ending, because we started with the soprano, is clearly the root, root, root. So therefore, we're going to use that knowledge we previously gained to voice this. This is another reason why you have to do harmony exercises on a regular basis, because you're going to encounter these same scenarios, obviously in different keys, but then you're going to get much quicker. You don't want to have to start over from 0 every time, but if you're not doing them on a regular basis, in a way you will be starting over from 0. Some danger moments. Notice that we have a 5-to-1 in the tonic key, so F sharp to B, and we cannot voice this as a perfect authentic cadence, because if we were to do so, then we would end the piece. Just as a reminder, in the very first episode of season 1, I went over the basic cadences, including the perfect authentic cadence, so just double check that if you're not sure what it does. Let's get down to action. So we talked about how the ending is a plagal cadence because we have that 4-to-1. And then we also talked about how there's a formula for this cadence, which we would know if we're doing these exercises on a regular basis, okay? So therefore, we're going to end with the tonic, tonic, tonic in soprano. It's very satisfactory, and you can check out Fugue, or you can check out, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it is just really, really calming and really, really beautiful way to end the piece. And it also signals to the listener that we're coming to an end because we have the tonic resting in the soprano. Now, let's get the note before. So we have a 5, and we need the leading tone. And the most obvious place for the 5 here would be the soprano, right? So generally, almost always, we end with a perfect authentic cadence. Here, we're ending with the plagal cadence, but at least prior, we're going to have the leading tone in the soprano, so it's more satisfactory that way. Now let's voice the deceptive cadence. Now you'll notice that I have a soprano qui bouge, as we could call it in French, so we have a moving soprano, and that's because there is an underline indicated in le chiffrage, as we call it in French or the Roman numerals, and it is telling us that one of the voices is going to be moving despite the fact that the bass is moving. So generally that's going to be the soprano, and it may not always work, but here I put the soprano. And notice that we have a deceptive cadence, right? You need to double check the tutorial I did if you're not sure about the deceptive cadence, because it is one of the first things I check for when people submit their work. Is it properly voiced? Okay, it's very simple. Leading tone goes up to the tonic. Other voices move in opposite direction to the bass. There is one minor exception, no pun intended, for major keys, but you can check out the tutorial to find out about that. So we see the leading tone soprano goes up to the tonic, and we see the other voices moving opposite direction to the bass. So very nice. Now you got to be able to recognize the problem. So notice that on this second beat, that technically we have incomplete harmony. So we talked about this in season 1, episode 9, that D minor exercise with that leap of an octave in the soprano. And we discussed how depending on the tempo, it may not be a problem, because if we're hearing this in 1, especially a faster 1, the listener is not going to perceive that there's a missing note from the chord. But in this particular case, it is a problem, because notice that there's hidden parallel octaves with the tenor and soprano, right? So notice that C sharp, okay, which has a C sharp in the tenor, is going to be likewise to the tenor. You may not notice this right away because only the soprano is moving, but you have to account for each, beat that is there, even if the main beat is going to be at the dotted quarter. So how do we resolve this? Well, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to use a voice exchange, okay? Voice exchange becomes extremely important, especially for first inversion chords, which we're not doing yet because we want to master the basics, and I promise you first inversion will be so much easier when you take the time to do root position chords on a very regular basis, right? Okay, put in that work. It's one of those things you got to pay yourself later, okay? It's an investment for now that's painful, but you will see progress. Usually there's a time delay of maybe 3 months, 6 months before you start seeing the progress, but that progress becomes exponential when you put in that regular work every week. All right, so in season 1, episode 9, we had a similar issue. It was on a different type of chord. Actually, no, it was also on a dominant. And we avoided parallel octaves by doing a voice exchange. So when the soprano was moving, we had the tenor, we're having the tenor move as well. That way we also catch the missing leading tone, and there are no longer any parallel octaves. Now let's talk about the perfect authentic cadence in relative keys. So if you study Bach chorales, and if you're looking to do fugue, for me, that is one of the most direct paths to getting ready for fugue, aside from doing harmony, because that gives you, the ability to manipulate time. But in terms of a passive study, the Bach chorales are great because he goes through all the keys that you're likely to go through in a traditional fugue. So when you study the Bach chorales, you'll notice many times when he goes to these other keys, he'll confirm it with a perfect authentic cadence in that key, not the global tonic. So in this case, we're in B minor, so he's not going to do a perfect authentic cadence in B minor in the middle of the exercise. But if he goes to, in this case, D major, he will do a perfect authentic cadence. It's a really nice way to mark the sections. It ends up being a very natural way to structure the form. All right, so I put the C sharp going to D, and then the note before I put the E. Now, how did I know to do this? This is a formula, okay? So you see more and more, it's about formulas. But if you try to just write down the formulas without the lived experience, it sounds so dramatic, but without the actual experience of doing it from scratch, then you're just on the surface and it's not something sustainable, right? When there becomes the pressure of time, or you have to orchestrate an entire piece, or you have to do voicing very quickly, you have to do fugue, you have these deadlines, that is when your training is really going to come in handy, and the memorization of formulas will not do you any justice. Now I want to test out the middle voices. All right, looks good. All right, so we kind of avoided the most difficult part. And, sometimes when we do exercises, you want to get these quick little wins, right? If there's a formula that you can put in that is going to work, test out the middle voices, it's nice to get that momentum. And it's also helpful because you have something in place that in French we call une valeur sûre. I can't pronounce it in French, but basically it's guaranteed, okay? It's guaranteed it's going to work. It's the best possible. And then you can work backwards and forwards to get the other parts, okay? So it's not totally a bad thing to do procrastination. But ultimately, you're going to have to tackle the hardest thing. If you remember the soprano exercise from season 1 that had that octave leap in D minor, it took us a couple episodes to really figure that out. That was the hardest thing. It was right smack at the very beginning. But once we figured out, the rest of the exercise was much quicker. So when you encounter a major difficulty like this, first you have to be able to analyze the exercise and find out where are the pitfalls. Okay, and this is clearly a pitfall because we have a 5-1 in B minor, but notice the exercise is not complete. So there is a danger that if we put that leading tone in the soprano, we're going to have to resolve it, of course, and then that piece is going to be over. So notice in this example that we have ended the piece, right? Si, sol, si, la, si, it's over, over, over. You can continue on if you like, but the listener has lost all attention. Now, of course, when you have, quote, real pieces of music, this may not be applied because there's other things going on, right? It depends how sturdy that cadence is. It depends how long other things are going on. But this is a short exercise, so you cannot have this because it's going to just kill the piece. Also notice here that we have an augmented second, okay, G to A sharp, which we really, really, really don't want. Maybe once in a blue moon, it can arrive in a circumstance like this where it's technically not side by side, but it's just probably an indication that we don't have the best voicing possible. So we got to look for an alternative to the perfect authentic cadence. And we don't have any options, but we do have options. So the central problem is placing that tonic in the soprano for the 1. Even if it's not a perfect authentic cadence, like it's just some other progression, just by having the tonic in the soprano with the bass, it's just going to draw unnecessary attention. It's just the listener is primed. We perceive that as kind of a stopping section. So you're going to have to put either the 3rd or the 5th. So first I chose the 3rd, and from there I use basic voice leading. Remember, I have a short called The Path of Least Resistance in which I remind you of just the basic voice leading principles. And here I did basically that. Notice that for the 4, we have un soprano qui bouge, as we say in French. We have a moving soprano to account for that underline in le chiffrage, as we say in French. Now, there's a danger of voicing the soprano too close to the bass. So in this example, notice that I put the 3rd in a lower octave for the soprano, and that is possible in that one particular instance, right? There's a distance of a tenth to the bass. Minimum distance can be an octave, so already that should be a warning sign, but that could, in theory, be possible. But notice to get there, the voice leading is going to give us a 5th before and a 5th distance after. So there's no room for alto and tenor. In this example, notice that I place the soprano on the 5th and we have a 12th distance to the bass. Okay, that's not that close, but I have to follow good voice leading, and thereafter I end up on the octave, which is okay, but following that, we have receptive cadence, and you're required to voice that correctly, and we're only a 5th away. In this next example, I put the 5th in soprano in order to mitigate this, and this is risky, right? Because it's really far away from the bass. So immediately I tested the middle voices. Can I find a way to make this work? Remember, the top three voices, you cannot have more than an octave distance between them. And for the one, we have a fifth alto to soprano, and tenor to alto, we have a sixth distance. From bass to tenor, we have a tenth, which is allowed between bass and tenor. So this actually works. Now, in this other realization, I would say it's actually better, okay, for the sole reason that notice that underline that I talked about prior, right, that indicates that the bass is staying still, the harmony is staying still, but another voice is moving. That's usually going to be the soprano, okay? So what I did here is I started on the fifth, and then I use this chiffrage, they call it in French. I used Roman numerals, I used indications to bring us up to another elevation. You'll remember from the soprano exercise from, I think it's from episode 9, we had a similar instance where the soprano was getting too low, and then we had to move the soprano up to get to a higher elevation. All right, so I hope you'll take the time to work on some harmony. Do not stop doing fugue. Do not stop doing orchestration, but put that investment little by little, and you will see progress, but you got to put in the time, you got to put the integrity. If you would like your work corrected, you can either find the soprano to get the entire soprano, or you can find the soprano and fill in the middle voices. Just make sure it's complete and you follow the proper voicing of the deceptive cadence and the rules for root position chords, and you can find the exercise on my website. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.